Okay, welcome everybody. We're excited that you've joined us for our webinar today. My name is Dave Clark. I'm your host today with Reading Horizons, and we'll be talking about the COVID-19 National Literacy Survey. And we'll see the results and look at potential solutions. Our presenter today is Laura Axtell. Laura has a master's degree in special education and counseling, and has worked in K-12 regular and alternative education in the US and internationally. She served as a special education and high school administrator and conducted training and workshops in diverse settings around the world. She currently serves as an educational specialist and trainer with Reading Horizons, where she helped to develop the online dyslexia screener. Laura is also the host of the educational podcast called Podcast. All right, we'll turn the time to Laura.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. You can see that we have a relatively small group of people on a national webinar, and I think that just speaks to the fact that these weeks are so busy and there's so much going on. So we really appreciate that you've taken an hour out of your busy schedule in the midst of all of this, and we hope that what we're going to share today is going to be of value to you. It is being recorded, so you'll get the recording tomorrow. That way you can go back and look at things. We're going to share lots of resources. We're going to take a couple of additional polls as we go throughout just to get some information from you. So we want to make sure that this time is well spent. As we go into, what we're going to talk about today, it's really three things. The first is to explore the information and proposed options that were brought up from the national survey. So many wonderful responses, and really from all over the country. And then to discuss multiple options for providing appropriate reading instruction and intervention regardless of the population and regardless of the setting. And then third, to focus on solutions for meeting literacy challenges because they're ongoing. And so we have really, the issues of direct instruction, remote instruction, or virtual instruction, hybrid, so many things going on. So we want to make sure that people feel like, I really want to share some hope that there are amazing resources that can really provide what we're looking for to provide a success for our students. So let's take a little look at the survey to begin. In terms of demographics, we got responses from 34 states, which was great. And you can see kind of all over the country, with the exception, we had to laugh. I'm not sure exactly what happened in most of the Midwest, but really many areas of the country. And I was particularly interested to see that Washington State responded because I have a really good resource from them. So I wanted to include that. In terms of job titles of who responded, the majority, 40%, were teachers. And then we had school level admins, district level admins, and reading specialists. So a nice balance with lots of perspectives. In terms of the school type of respondents, the vast majority here was elementary, 75%, with 19% both, elementary and secondary, 5% secondary only. So let's talk about the results of the survey. And I'm going to go through this again very quickly today. There's a lot to cover in a short period of time, but that's why the recording will be available, and also some links to some of the resources that we're mentioning here. So you'll be able to follow up tomorrow. So the big question here is, what is the school plan for next year? And you can see that there are a variety of options. So the highest number of responses was that students have the option to come either physically or to learn remotely. In most cases, that means they have to choose one or the other. And then students also will have, in many places, the ability to do a hybrid model, which means they'll be in school sometime and they'll be working from home remotely sometimes. 37 respondents said their students will come to physical classrooms. That means all day, every day, for the most part. But 36 respondents said, and you'll see this throughout, that in many cases, the final decisions have not yet been made. And then 22 respondent students will learn remotely. And then another thing that's starting to happen around the country and even has changed in the last couple of weeks is that some districts have chosen to start remotely with a plan for them to come back to school if that's a possibility, or the reverse. So they're going to start in school and then if they need to go remote. So still things in flux. When we're looking at what platforms or technologies for remote learning, by far the largest number said Google Classroom. A lot of people were already using that in their classroom, so that was a nice pivot. But many people in many schools started to use Zoom as their online instruction, and so those two by far comprise the largest percentage. And then paper assignments and packets were necessary because lots of students didn't have access under such quick turnaround to have resources like devices and internet and things like that. 24 said other, and then other platforms were Seesaw, Schoology, and Canvas that were mentioned, and then there were a lot of other little ones, less than 1%. So what percentage of your students do have access to internet? As you can see, about 31% said 95% of their students do have access to that. 30% said 75% or more of their students have access to it. So when we come down to, a lot of that happened over the spring and the summer. Now more schools have provided those resources and have those in place, but there are still a percentage of students for whom that is not in place yet, and schools are really working on that. So as we ask the question, do you have enough devices and technical support staff to provide that virtual instruction? The vast majority at this point said yes, and then there were some other components for enough devices but limited technical support, limited devices but good technical support, etc. And still 18% talking about the goal to ensure that that's in place for the fall. I was just talking to an administrator of school yesterday. Their Chromebooks are in back order. They were told they would come the beginning of August, and now it looks like that might not be until much later in September, maybe even October, because everybody's trying to get these devices. If any of the learning will occur remotely, what model of instruction are you going to use? So again, this really just provides lots of resource or lots of information about what people will be doing. Again, read 25% of the decision has not been yet made about that. So the largest percentage, 46%, will use a blended learning model of some direct instruction and some software. And again, for many schools, that is a continuation of what they started in the spring. And then a percentage will provide all instruction remotely via devices or print materials. And then, some teachers will assign software instruction with limited direct instruction. So again, a variety of options. This is just information about how often teachers are going to be expected to provide instruction. And you can see that the vast majority here, it has not yet been determined. We're going to talk a little bit about hours, recommended hours per student, but for teachers, that is still in flux because the models have not often been finalized. But in terms of how many hours per day are we expecting students to participate in remote learning, the largest percentage, again, has not been determined. And then the next largest percentage, 21%, will vary. So that may, be based on kindergarten, grade level, type of instruction, etc. So we'll get a chance to see that in a minute. If students will be receiving some instruction at school, what is your anticipated schedule? And here it's helpful to see what other people are doing. So the largest percentage at this point is that all students are going to attend 5 days a week with no remote learning. That may change and has changed for some districts and states already as there's been COVID spread. Many schools are going to be doing the rotation with like an A/B day. I was just talking to a school yesterday who they've got students who are in cohorts. So group A will come 2 days a week, group B will come 2 days a week, and then Wednesday is their an additional remote period of time and planning. And again, many schools have said you're going to, parents will have to choose all remote learning or come to school. And then there's also a model out there I can see that several have responded to, that students will rotate, but they'll rotate by week. So a group of students would be, all in class for a week. So there'd be that consistency while the other group was online, and then they would switch the next week. That would help with, deep cleaning, consistency, things like that. An interesting thing that's kind of surprised me is that, what are your plans for in-service or professional development? For the vast majority, there is at least a plan. So, a quarter have still have to decide exactly, but you know, is that going to be on site? Is that going to be remote? Or is it going to be, again, a combination? Because as we're going into this new year, that professional development and support for teachers is going to be essential, especially as, you know, new options for learning are going to be in place. So, and now we're going to shift a little bit to reading and specifics about that. So the question was, do you anticipate needing additional literacy resources and curriculum this fall? And you can see that the majority said yes, they feel like they're going to need both teacher-led instruction and virtual resources for Tier 1, so whole class. Second highest number of responses was yes for intervention, special education, and other specific populations. A good group said we have everything we need, which is awesome. And then some schools are going to need virtual resources only. So they may have the direct instruction pieces and those things that they can do when students are in person, but they will need support for the remote option. So compared to previous reading instruction, what performance expectations do you have for remote learning? The majority of teachers and administrators really had a high expectation for what their students will be able to accomplish in reading, even when they're remote or virtual. So, you know, the majority felt like at least 75% or above, and as well as 90% or above. But a percentage of people also was very concerned about that. That'll come up in a moment. Well, the question was asked, what concerns do you have about meeting the needs of students with special populations? And the largest response here was students without remote access who do not participate. So if you have students with special needs and they're not able to access instruction, having time to provide adequate intervention, creating remote learning plans for students, we'll talk about that more in a moment. Having enough qualified staff to meet needs, that's often difficult even in the best of times at schools, and so this just makes that more of a challenge. And having appropriate instructional technology, because in many cases that is going to need to be part of the plan. And if students will receive any on-site reading instruction, have you modified your plan to allow for visual observation of the mouth? That question was asked because often if you haven't been really focused on, you know, the importance of using, you know, the mouth for articulation, pronunciation, etc., there may not have been just a consideration of that. And so the largest percentage of responses for this question said that students and teachers will have clear masks or shields. And a fairly large percentage said no, they haven't really modified that plan. And then another percentage said students will socially distance and not wear masks. Sometimes that's also based on the age of the student. So for younger students, they may not be required, but older students might. So then we asked an open-ended question. What were the biggest concerns people had for next school year? And there were many, many responses, and many of them were, you know, just really expressed a lot of the anxiety and just, you know, concern and uncertainty. But when we looked at all of those responses, they really came down to 5 major areas. The first one was health and safety of students and staff. That is probably no surprise to anyone. And that includes things like, you know, what happens if a teacher gets sick and we have staff shortages? So all those kinds of things about really planning for, you know, what if, you know, the spread increases and, you know, we don't have the ability to respond as quickly as we need to, those kinds of things. Next was instructional concerns. So again, that is really where we come into meeting the needs of the students, our ELL students, our special ed students, our students who need intervention, students with dyslexia, etc. Technology and access issues, we talked a little bit about that, not having devices, not having support, not having the instructional materials to provide that virtual instruction. Social and emotional needs of student and staff came up quite frequently as well, because again, we're not just focused on instruction. We know that school meets a lot of needs for many of our students, and so students are at home, and they have been at home now for months, and you know, there's a lot of stress, and so really that came up as an issue. And then the last one is that uncertainty, just unknown plans, sudden changes. Staff are working really hard to try and get things in place, and yet they don't often have control over what a governor or a district or a board of education decides. And so, just really not really knowing where do we go from here. So what I'd like to do is just do our first poll, and feel free as we're going through to also put questions in the chat. We have an amazing person on that end who can, respond, answer questions, etc. So the question is, if you participated, since you've participated in the survey, has anything changed on your school reopening plan since you completed the survey? So have they changed the start date? Have they changed the option for instruction, etc.? So give you a few more seconds. And this just really speaks to the fluidity of what's happening. So it looks like about 50% since you completed the survey a week or so ago, things have changed. So again, this is really something that we're going to be continuing to work through this summer and probably into the fall. So before we get started, let's talk a little bit about terms. We're just going to go into some resources now. And so something that I think comes up is whenever we move into a new era or new, learning area of education, we have to know what the terms mean. So you'll maybe have heard synchronous and asynchronous learning. And so we just wanted to provide those terms because we'll talk about those types of learning as throughout. So synchronous learning is online or distant learning that occurs in real time, but not in the same place. So that would be online instruction with a teacher through Zoom or Google Classroom, interactive webinars, online discussion boards, things like that, where people are interacting in real time. Asynchronous learning is online or distant learning that occurs in different places and at different times through online channels without real-time interaction. So that could be recorded video lessons, game-based learning, tasks, software instruction, etc. For most people, when we talk about the term hybrid, it's defined by most people now as a blend of both in-person and that virtual learning. So we'll use those terms throughout. So we're going to talk a little bit about some resources now, and I'm going to run through these pretty quickly because then you can decide if there's something you would like to dive into more, but these are the things that kept coming up that people were very interested in. So these are outside resources. So this is an article from the Christensen Institute, which is really a leader in, and has always been a leader in, blended learning. And this article that was in EdSurge is really about revisiting blended learning, those models, and how to really think through and apply those models, those various models. So for example, they revisit the concepts of flipped classrooms, virtual enhanced, a la carte. It's a really good article just to start, and it's short. So it's really just kind of gives you a place to start in thinking about what are the other options that we can really consider as we're going through. This was a great resource that I didn't even know about. This is the University of Florida College of Education has created a virtual teaching resource hub. Now, what's interesting about this is it has existed for decades. And so they have done a really good job, first of all, of creating all these resources. So, there's one on lesson structure, instructional activities. They have a whole section on managing attention and behavior and, virtual teaching, and then tech tools and tips. And then you can dive in even further. And there's a wealth of resources about literacy and teaching literacy online. So again, just really a lot of resources, and everything is free. Now I'm going to, focus on a couple of other things that come up that it's really difficult to find some of these resources. And so my goal is really just to curate some things that might be helpful as you're going forward. So continuous learning plans is something that every state has now established in various degrees. Kansas has done a really good one. And so you can go online to continuous learning at their Department of Education, and they have this whole task force guidance, which is really, very comprehensive. But they're the first state that identified or recommended specific hours for students to be online, and many states then took that and adopted that as their recommendation. So you can see that, for pre-K, we're talking about 30 minutes, K1, 45 minutes. And then as grades go up to secondary, then that is extended. But they were very specific about, any kind of delivery model. So packets, online, hybrid, etc. So if you're interested in looking at that, it's a really good resource. And then another really great resource, this is one I mentioned from Washington State. This is their Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. They have an entire section on of COVID-19 guidance and resources. And you can see on the right, they have really gone into a great lot of depth about, for many of the different categories, but I'm going to just focus on two. One is special education, and the second one is supporting English language learners, because that comes up a lot. So what Washington did is they created a special education continuous learning plan that can be used as a template. It's hard to find these, and theirs is very complete. It's very comprehensive, and you can modify it. And in some cases, this is being called, a remote learning plan or a contingency learning plan for special ed. But we do know that the Department of Education did not create a waiver for special education students, so IEPs are still in effect. And so a continuous learning plan can provide that supplement to talk about how we're going to provide instruction remotely. So having a resource like this, and it's several pages long, and it's in a Word doc, so really helpful. What they also did too is create a really great resource for ELL students, and a couple of things there. They created a continuous learning plan for English language learners. This is a one-page document that, again, you could use as a template. But something else that they had in the appendix that I thought was really valuable is a list of resources. So this is, free resources, free content for ELL students. What I really liked about this is that it identified who the appropriate audience was by grade, and also how it could be used and by whom. So, is this something an educator could use? Is it something a family could use? Is it something a student could use? And there's a page of those. And so again, really valuable resources. We don't need to reinvent the wheel if we can find resources that have been very valuable. And I know lots of states have been sharing what they found. So that's great. The other thing that I just have to tell you a short story. I was talking to one of our implementation coaches, and they were talking about, working with a school in the spring and how they developed such a wonderful hybrid model, and they had everything in place. But when they actually started, it all kind of fell apart. And what they had neglected to consider is how important having family agreements would be when they implemented this model. And so this is just some of the things that we would want to consider as we're having families participate and partner with us with schools as they're doing hybrid or remote learning. In particular, this comes into play when schools have given families a choice. So they have a choice to go all remote or all virtual. And in that case, if they've taken that as a choice, we really want to ensure that they have, that there's an agreement about how that will happen. And so just things like, defining this physical space for your child's work time, monitoring communications with a teacher so that we're keeping track of that, take an active role, just some really good ideas. The other thing that is something that's helpful is that many schools normally would have an open house at the beginning of the year, and some schools have gone virtual now and have a remote open house, or with their teachers, so that the families and the students can meet their teacher before all of this starts, and they can go over some of these things. They can meet and discuss options, what they'll be doing, and the schedule, because it is very likely that in many schools the decision will come down to closer and closer to the beginning of school. And the more families have information and can be part of that process, and the more we communicate if there's going to be an issue, especially if you've got families with multiple children, so the plan may not work for them, or you've got kids with special needs, and we really need to communicate with families about that. One other thing is, just in terms of you know, if you do have a meeting before school starts or as school is starting, having something like this, which just spells out those expectations for when we're on Zoom. I actually adapted this from another source, and I loved it so much, but I wish I could cite where I got it from and who did this. It was really just a very simple way of, you know, at the beginning, we're going to talk about what our expectations, and then in the first couple of Zoom sessions, it's kind of like you would do as a part of a morning meeting. You know, let's just go over our expectations, and then if somebody is having a difficulty with one of those, then you can have that conversation with them privately, and let's talk about what the expectations are, or as a group. So now we're going to take the second poll, and the poll here is just to see what resources are most valuable. And what kinds of things are you more interested in exploring as you're considering school reopening? And I see that there are chats coming in, so Chloe, let me know if there's something I need to respond to, but it'd just be helpful to see, and you can do as many as you want. So if you saw something that you thought was interesting that you might want to check into later. And again, you'll have links to these resources in the email that comes out tomorrow. It's really helpful for us to know what you find most of value and what you might want to consider looking at later. Okay, so it looks like the biggest things of interest were those blended learning models, special education, that's come up quite a bit, and then those online expectations for students. So thank you for that. So as we move on, now we're going to move to talking about providing effective reading instruction and intervention. So we know that this is a critical area, regardless of, you know, where we are in the country, regardless of, you know, the populations we work with, et cetera. And so to start there, we want to talk about a little bit about the science of reading and structured literacy, because that really is the focus of effective reading instruction. And so just to define that, that's the term that gets thrown around a lot. One easy definition of that is the science of reading includes all methods and approaches that have been found through research to give kids a learning advantage in reading. So really what we know about reading is that it takes, you know, we're working in the brain. So activating language centers, connecting, you know, the sounds to print, those kinds of things. And so the science of reading is really important for us to be aware of. If you have seen this or maybe haven't seen this, a simple view of reading is really a helpful way to think about it. And so if we're talking about how we read for meaning, it's really composed of two major areas. One is decoding of text. So we have to be able to decode what we're reading. And the other one is we have to be able to comprehend it, either because we know the vocabulary, what the words mean, or if we're an English language learner, we have to understand the English for that. And so this is a product, not a sum. That means we're, you know, if we don't have good decoding skills, even though we can understand oral language very well, etc., we're still not going to be able to read for meaning. And conversely, if we have a little bit of the ability to decode and great oral comprehension, we're still going to be limited in our ability to comprehend. So when we're talking about instruction intervention, really, this comes up a great deal because many of our students that we know are struggling have characteristics of dyslexia. So that whole piece around really you know, the ability to decode text is now really focused on providing the kind of instruction which is called structured literacy. And that's that explicit instruction that teaches, you know, word identification and decoding strategies. The International Dyslexia Association has, you know, said it very succinctly that it benefits, you know, most students. It's good for all students, but it's vital for students that have dyslexia and other print-based disabilities. And because dyslexia often has, you know, incurs with a deficit in phonological processing, that those foundational skills explicitly taught and assessed are absolutely necessary. So when we're talking about structured literacy, really, this graphic just kind of explains both the elements and the teaching principles. And so structured literacy encompasses evidence-based programs and approaches that are aligned to the science of reading, explicitly teaches systematic word identification decoding strategies, and teaches evidence-based elements using teaching principles found in research. So that when we're talking about effective reading, that's really what we mean. Not that there can't, we've lots and lots of wonderful resources, and many of us were trained on, other higher level skills. But when we're talking about quality instruction that begins at the foundation, that's what we mean. So generally, what most schools have been doing is we're talking about providing, reading instruction in person, which is what people were generally doing. And that can be done whole class, tier 1. A differentiated small group, either as a station rotation within a classroom or as differentiated small groups for intervention, and also as individualized software. So lots of schools have been doing that already. And now what we're doing is we're realizing that to do high quality reading instruction virtually, there are going to need to be resources for that as well. So that often means small group instruction that's going to be happening synchronously with a teacher who's going to be providing that instruction, but it may also be provided asynchronously. So recorded lessons that students can watch at any time, or videos, things like that. And then also the ability to use instructional software, but software that can be accessed from home. So every student has their own login, that kind of thing. And then you're receiving the data so you can track student progress and use that for benchmarking and progress monitoring, etc. Really important for students who are in intervention and on IEPs. So providing that high quality reading instruction often is going to happen in the fall as part of a hybrid. And so what that really means is, in order to do that, we need to have the resources in place that will provide that in-person instruction intervention in all 3 tiers and special education K to 12. So a lot of schools have started moving toward, science of reading and really finding the appropriate resources to be able to do that direct instruction and to provide that through a synchronous platform, so that they can continue to do that with their students remotely. But also there's that consistent instructional resources for remote learning, and that really does need to be aligned. Having that direct instruction and software aligned makes a big difference, because that way you're going to be able to help your students make more progress. So now we're going to talk a little bit about Reading Horizons as a solution, and that includes direct instruction, software, and professional development. And the great thing about this is that, Reading Horizons has existed for, many decades, and always software has been a part of the program aligned directly to direct instruction. So when we talked about those needs for effective instruction earlier, those in-person direct instruction materials exist at both the K3 level in a program called Reading Horizons Discovery, and also for older students. Really important that they have materials that are specifically designed for them. And so those materials are called Reading Horizons Elevate, and that's 4th grade and above all the way to adult. And then the individualized software is aligned to that direct instruction. So the same lesson in the in-person materials or direct instruction materials would be found on the software as well. And then having digital resources. Digital resources are incredibly important, because as students are working either in the classroom where you can project something or you can show it on your screen if they're working from home, very, very valuable to have. And there are so many resources that Reading Horizons had already developed, and then have even created more for our current situation. So when we're talking about explicit instruction in person and virtual, let's just talk about some of the resources for that. So teacher-led lessons, those have been all recorded and they're available online. So think of a new teacher, or a teacher who's new to or Gillingham or multisensory research-aligned instruction. Those lessons have already been provided by a skilled instructor. So the teacher can have that access to play either in the classroom or remotely. Resources for direct instruction include, teacher manuals, posters, decodable readers, all the things that students need when they're working, and those things are also available also virtually. And then support videos and lesson prep tools. A lot of times what you really need is the availability to do things like print information for kids for packets, for example, if students don't have access, which is still an issue for a number of school districts. So having all these resources and the availability of being able to find them all in one place and then to share them, really, really valuable. And then the last is individualized software. If software is fully instructional so that students are still able to get that instruction online and the teacher is able to get the data, then they can provide that additional support if and when they're meeting with students or a small group of students in online, so that that instruction can continue, that you can hear students reading, so many options there. When we're talking about research-aligned best practices for reading instruction, really this just applies across the board. And this is the process and the instructional routine that Reading Horizons follows. We always want to start with a review. We want to determine if students have retained information from the previous skill and can apply it in text. If they can, and if they are able to encode and decode, then we know that they're ready to move on to the next skill, and that instruction piece would be that explicit instruction and modeling of a new skill. And that's based on a guided release of responsibility. So I do, we do, you do. So that's the I do. And because every skill is separate and explicit, it builds on previous skills. So it's cumulative over time, and students can see how this skill now, this new skill, connects to everything that they've been learning. And then guided practice is that dictation. That is the multisensory piece, really, really important for, visual, auditory, tactile, and kinesthetic. And that's the formative assessment. That tells you if students are able to apply this new skill in addition to the previous skills that they've learned. And when we see that they are, or a group of students are, we can move to transfer. The research is very clear that it is essential that students are always going from new skills in isolation then to skills in text and authentic text. So transfer, there's a whole process for that, which is so simple. It starts with something called transfer cards, which are a great resource for identifying if students can decode words based on the skill, and then move to either decodable readers, reading passages, etc. And then you can expand that time to include things like games and activities, practice pages, reading and writing activities, just so many options. So generally what that instructional routine looks like is 30 to 45 minutes. But again, that's in person. That's something that happens in the same process on the software, and that can be broken up over days. So it generally takes several days to get all the way through a lesson. So we're always starting with that review. If we're going to a new lesson, then we're going to be providing that instruction. If not, we're going to continue on with those activities for transfer. So resources to support instruction, that's guided and independent practice opportunities, and that's the real issue here is connecting them again to fluent reading and writing at the word, sentence, and connected text levels. So what has already been provided are transfer cards and student packets. And so there you're able to print anything that is available in terms of those resources, or you can project them on your screen, either in class through your projector whiteboard, or pull it up on your screen if you're doing synchronous. And then transfer, so this is just some of the activities, practice pages. And then targeted virtual practice, you have control over what your students do on the software, and you can also see what they're doing. So lots and lots of options, including the ability to even modify lesson passing percentages and test passing percentages to match those in an IEP. That really helps to progress monitor for benchmarking. And then having the ability to have decodable readers and reading passages always at the student's instructional level. So decodable readers are those that are generally 90 to 100% decodable based on the skills that students have already been exposed to. That does a number of things. It really builds confidence, first of all, but again, we're working toward fluency and comprehension because all of the decodable text and reading passages have built-in comprehension and vocabulary. For older students, the library passages are Lexile level from first grade all the way to 12.9. So students are always reading at their instructional level. They're written for older students, so they're a lot of times connected to content like history, science, almost 33 different categories. And there are 330 of those passages at the upper level for Elevate. So the decodable readers, there's one little book or one decodable reader for every skill. So students always are, again, as part of that transfer process, moving into authentic text. The decodable readers are 50% fiction and 50% nonfiction. So students get an opportunity to read both. And then again, you can project those. Those are something you can pull up on your screen and have students reading so you can hearing them. Some teachers have them go onto Seesaw and record themselves reading and share them. So many options there as well. And so this is an example of a reading passage in Elevate with those comprehension questions at the end. And again, all that data is being stored in terms of how kids are doing on comprehension when they're reading independently on the software. Another thing that, as we discussed, is going to be really important is the kind of professional development that is available to support teachers during this time as they're implementing either new platforms and ways of providing instruction or new resources and curriculum. So for example, we have an online professional development course, which is one module for every chapter in both programs, Discovery and Elevate. There are 6 chapters that go, start simple and go more complex based on grade level. And so that online professional development course allows teachers to access the content from any chapter anytime they want to. It's available 24/7, it's all web-based, and it's like having a trainer in the room with you because they're going to go over all the skills. It's a refresher after training, but it's also a way to deeper dive into any of the content that teachers are going to be providing. Lots of coaching, classroom feedback, observation, support for teachers who are new to either the science of reading or to Reading Horizons. And then professional learning communities often are really valuable for providing that additional support. And I'm just going to mention these other 2 because there's a really great resource. Data dives and virtual coaching. So for example, we have something called customer success managers. Every one of our schools that uses Reading Horizons has access free for the life of their implementation to a customer success manager. And their job is to do things like, software orientations, to provide support with data, and to answer questions, to help with technical issues, just so many options. And so that professional development is going to need to be really solid and available for teachers as we go into the new year. If you haven't already, I would recommend that you go to our website, readinghorizons.com. You can see that banner at the top to get more of those resources that are available for classroom support during COVID, but also just scrolling down and seeing all of the resources that are available. So for example, there's PowerPoints, there's, the packets have already been done for you, just so many resources. Reading Horizons has been endorsed or reviewed by a number of organizations. These are a few of them. Florida Center for Reading Research. We're endorsed by the Council for Administrators of Special Education. We were just added to the Arkansas Approved Science of Reading curriculum. As you know, Arkansas has the RISE Act, which is probably the most comprehensive legislation in the country for reading now. And then the University of Austin, Texas Meadow Center. So it's really helpful to hear what the experience of an educator who was brand new, like many of you would be, and had to do that pivot at the end of the year after starting with direct instruction and then literally having to move over a weekend to all virtual instruction. So we're just going to watch a short video, 4 minutes.
All right, Laura, we're queuing it up. Let's go ahead and make sure that works here. Okay. All right, this is it, right?
Angela Olson, and I teach first grade in Davis County at Buffalo Point Elementary. This was my first year there. So this was my very first year doing Reading Horizons, and it was so amazing watching these little people accomplish so much more than I'd ever seen in all the years that I've been teaching. At the beginning of the year, I'd identified 8 students in my classroom that I knew had dyslexic tendencies. Last year, all of those kids would have had to been referred for special ed services. But at the end of this year, I only had 1 that I had to refer. Everybody else made such gains that even though they're not, completely on level, I felt strongly that they're going to be okay. And it makes them feel so empowered, when they know these things. And then to see them read and be able to write. I mean, it was amazing the progress they made on writing. They know how to do it, and they sound out their words, and they write words that you never thought they could write. And it was so cute because my first graders made it all the way through Phonetic Skill 4, and they kept saying, when do we get to do number 5? Are we going to do number 5 today? And they come, is today the day? And I'm like, oh, we have a few more things to learn, and then we can do number 5. But when they tell us that the school's closing and we had absolutely no notice, I left school on a Friday and I had everything planned for Monday and I never got to go back. And so I was really frustrated because, we were so close to reaching our goal. I was so grateful when they reached out and said that we could have the digital component. And then I found the PowerPoints for the lessons. And so I was like, oh my gosh, we're going to be able to keep going. They're going to learn Phonetic Skill 5. So I was able to, do the direct instruction on Loom with my PowerPoints that were already put together for me. So I really appreciated that I had those resources that I could just keep going and keep the pace that I had already started. So, I really tried hard to get all the pieces in. And then I was able to use the Discovery Clubhouse to support what we were learning. And it was so fun to start a video and sit down and say, guess what, guys? Today we get to learn Phonetic Skill 5. We have been waiting, and today is the day. And so we were able to finish it. We wouldn't have had that experience without the tools that you provided. And so as a teacher, I just feel really grateful that I have you, that I have Reading Horizons, that I see people post on Facebook how to do this and how to do that. And I'm like, hello, Reading Horizons has it all worked out for you. I need a tier 1 model, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, Reading Horizons does all 3 tiers, So I'm just out there waving the banner the best that I can. And I'm just grateful. Thank you to everyone there. You're so good to work with. And I'm grateful that, I'm on the team to help change the world one student in class at a time.
Okay, Laura, should be able to, you're on mute. I should be able to take that back over. So.
Okay, so thank you for that. We love Angela, and she had that absolute experience of being a first-year teacher in her school, first-year teacher with Reading Horizons, and then literally leaving school on a Friday thinking you're coming back on Monday and having to totally change your method of instruction and being able to keep going. So that's why we feel so strongly that this is an excellent resource um, for schools. Oh, sorry. So we've got poll number 3 now. This is our last poll. We're almost to the end. And so what we'd like to know is if there is any way that we can support you. So what literacy resources can support you as your school reopens? And if you're looking for something that you think we could help with, we'd love to be able to provide as much information as possible. So whether it's Reading Horizons or something else, it's helpful to know what people feel like they really need. As you recall from the beginning responses, a large percentage of the respondents said that their school was going to need additional literacy curriculum, and in particular resources for intervention that could be done virtually, and also just virtual resources and things that could be digital. So I do want to put a plug in here. I don't see anybody responding yet for grades 4th and above, but sometimes what we realize too is that our older learners are, if they're, whether they're going to be remote or in school, often need real support with intervention. And many of us were not trained to provide that level of foundational skills. And that's why we feel so strongly about Elevate. It is such a way to provide that rapid support and intervention for older learners and students with dyslexia. Okay, just a few more seconds. Lots of options, I know. So you can certainly do more than one. Okay, so it looks like remote teacher-led instructions, obviously very valuable, and remote and virtual professional development again, but just kind of a range of all kinds of things. So, you know, we are in this together, and yet every school and every district is doing their own thing too. So wherever we can, you know, provide support to each other, and where companies really have stepped up, in many companies, literacy companies have shared their resources, and it's been really amazing to see that. And now it's going to this next year with so much going on. We want to make sure that students are getting what they need and that teachers are getting what they need. Oh, sorry. So we've got a few moments for questions, and then we're going to show a short method video, which just kind of walks through very briefly the major components for decoding instruction and Reading Horizons. So I'm going to just look in the chat really quickly, or Chloe can jump on if there are questions.
No new questions just yet. I'm sure people are typing away.
Okay, well, let me know. All right, so what we'd like to do now is just show a short video. If you're not familiar with Reading Horizons, I think what will really be, and certainly what just blew me away when I was introduced to Reading Horizons, even though I was certified in other reading programs, was the simplicity of it and the logic of it, and how quickly students could apply the skills. So we'll just take a short listen to this, and then we'll come back and see if there's anything else we can do to support you.
The Reading Horizons method is explicit, systematic, sequential, multisensory, and moves from simple to complex. We begin with alphabet instruction. We teach in letter groups, 4 to 5 consonants with the vowel sound, building to slides and words. From there, we move to blends, also building to slides with the vowel sound, and then to words. From here, we move to the 5 phonetic skills, which prove whether the vowel is going to be short or long within a word and within syllable types. Phonetic skill 1 is when a vowel is followed by one consonant, the vowel will be short. Phonetic skill 2 is when a vowel is followed by 2 consonants, the vowel will be short. Phonetic skill 3 is when a vowel stands alone, it will be long. Phonetic skill 4, when there is a silent E at the end of a word, the previous vowel will be long. And phonetic skill 5, when certain vowels are adjacent, the second vowel is silent and the first vowel will be long. Next, we move to the 2 decoding skills, which tell us where to divide any word of any length. Decoding skill 1 is if there is just one consonant following the vowel, that consonant will move to the next syllable. Decoding skill 2 is when there is more than one consonant between vowels, the consonants will split. From here, all additional sounds, spellings, and skills are taught to ensure a solid foundation.
Okay. So really short. And we'd be happy to spend more time sharing that information, having you see an online presentation, etc. Okay. So we're about at our hour now. If there are no other questions, again, we would be happy to talk with you afterwards. And we just thank you so much for spending this time with us today. We know that you've got so much on your plate. And so we really just want to be the resource that's available for you as needed. So, and Dave?
Right, yes, thank you so much, Laura, for that very useful information. Especially today in the challenging times that we face. So we appreciate all of your time and everybody for joining us today. And we wish you the best with the challenges that we face, and really we have the opportunity to help so many children. Thank you for all you do for our children of our country. We really appreciate it. You're wonderful. Thanks.